how much volume do I actually need to put on muscle? And it's an interesting question, and there's some things to talk about here. So I thought we'd dig into that and took some notes just to make sure we're staying on track today. Again, this is one of those things where there's a lot of research on this, and whenever you're reading research, and again, that term even has become a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for?
Watered down. I don't know.
Yeah, like what is the research? You Googled it, or
I did some research.
No, you dug into the strength and conditioning journals and the peer-reviewed studies and things like that. And then, at what level do you actually understand that stuff, or did you get this from Muscle and Fiction magazine, or come from YouTube or whatever? And it's not to say any of that stuff is bad or wrong. It's just there's a lot of mixed messages and signals out there. But going back to the research part of it, it's like, who is actually being researched, right? And who was the study done? How long was it done for? That's a whole other topic I would actually like to get into with you guys. When we look at how strength and conditioning research is done, and then what people do with that research and take it into application. Maybe this is sort of giving away the next topic, and that a lot of it is flawed, very flawed.
Yeah.
Because when you take it into application, you recognize that it doesn't work.
Yeah. Can you replicate it?
Yeah. Can you replicate it? Like, again, who was the subject matter this study was done around and so forth? Again, I don't want to go too far off on a tangent when we're talking about volume for hypertrophy, but I think what happens when we start asking questions about their hypertrophy programs is they start talking about all the reps and sets and how many exercises they're doing per body part. And again, then we can start to get into, well, what's the intensity levels like in those, I'm going to failure, or I'm going close to failure. All right, how close, and how many, what does your build set pattern look like for your heavier lifts on your bigger compound lifts, or your main movements, we could refer to them as, those kind of things. What are you doing for those ancillary things? When you're like in a more of a repetition sequence within your workout program, how many sets you do before that? Like, these things matter, but people don't like to get into that. And I think the general exercise doesn't like to get into that, because then it comes down to, dude, I just want to work out, bro. Like, do I really need to know all this? I'm like, no, you don't need to know it all. But like, if you're going to put the time in, and I see you're working hard and you're inquisitive and you're asking questions, like, this is stuff that you want to be aware of. And good coaches and good programming will build this in to the program, but it's only good as the individual that's doing it and the consistency and the commitment that they made to that program and sticking to it. But obviously there's execution of this. So what we find a lot of times is junk volume. It's just extra reps and sets that you're probably not getting a ton out of. And when we say the term junk volume, I think people have heard that before, but they might not actually understand what that means.
Yeah.
So let's define it. Let's define what junk volume kind of is. I mean, how would you guys define it in simplest terms?
Well, to define junk volume, I think it's important to define basically what is appropriate volume, or meaning what's like effective stimulus.
Right.
And so we're seeing, I think a lot of the data now, even there's all the nuance of the test subjects and all that stuff, is for an adaptive response for hypertrophy, for something that is anabolic, a set to be anabolic, there needs to be some regard to its proximity to failure, right? And there is some data of like getting all the way to failure, but there can be benefits to even going 5 reps, as far as 5 reps away from failure. But there needs to be some proximity to failure, so it's a hard working set. So defining that as a hardworking set, junk volume would be any set that does not meet those parameters. So either a set that the load was not challenging enough, or the volume was off, or even if it was a challenging load, but you could have done way more volume with that load. If it's not meeting those parameters of some proximity to failure, that is junk volume.
Yeah, basically what we're trying to do is like induce an adaptation.
Yes.
And get that muscle to grow.
Okay, Ryan. So I hear what you're saying as far as proximity to failure, but so what do you call your build sets?
I mean, those are literally, in my mind, like a build set. That should not be equated in your total volume. A build set should be with the intention of it's warming your body up, warming up your central nervous system. It's a great way to practice the exercise with low risk, but it's not equated in your total volume. So if let's say you're doing 5 sets, but but 3 of those are working sets. Those are hard stimulating sets. And those first 2 sets are build sets with like 60, 80%. not taking proximity to failure, though you don't count all 5 of those sets as your total working volume. You would count those 3 working sets as your total working volume when you're equating this for the week or whatever with your coach. When your coach is prescribing a 4x5 or whatever, those 4 sets are stimulating sets, not counting those 2 build sets.
Yeah, there's a couple nuanced pieces there too, because you see a lot of program where, like a 5x5 program is an example, like it doesn't start right until you've reached your working your working intensity for that first 5 reps on that first set, right? So what did you do to build up to that? And that needs to be managed, and that's something that it doesn't get talked about a lot, and we can talk more about that later. But to that point, like that is very important, because you got this program sitting in front of you and it's been prescribed on doing a 5x5 today. And how long did it take you to actually get into the quote unquote hard set, right? Because if, to your point, like if you use those first 2 sets of 5 as build sets, well, then you're only getting 3, and that volume doesn't equate the same, right? So that's something to be aware of. And then what do those build sets look like later in your workout, right? Like as you're moving from your main lifts, maybe more into your more auxiliary, ancillary type repetition, higher volume or higher rep count sets into your work. Like, do you really need, for example, I did a barbell back squat, and then later in my workout, I'm gonna be doing a Bulgarian split squat, right? To add additional volume without the same level of intensity, the same amount of load. Like, do I need to go through 2 build sets to get to my working sets in the Bulgarian split squat if I've already just taxed myself over there at the squat rack for a 5x5, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Should I practice? Should I get up there, get myself set up, get my, my box set up, my bench set up or whatever? Absolutely. And might I put a little load in that? Absolutely. But that doesn't count. How much time am I spending, and how much quote unquote junk volume am I using or is being is stacking up in my workout sessions that don't matter, right? That are quite effectively, I guess, taking away from the time that I have, the efficiency that I have. And you might feel good doing it. I'm not going to take anything away from that. I'm just saying, like, it's probably not helping you with your goal if we've got a defined goal of I'm trying to put on muscle and strength here. So muscle was the hypertrophy was the topic, but it accounts for strength as well. Like, what are we really doing here? So the question that you're sort of, I think, alluding to is, so how close to failure do I actually need to be in order to grow muscle mass? Yeah. So this thing, I think when you look at it, there's some nuance to this, but basically evidence suggests that, like, for your bigger compound movements, you could be a little further away from failure on those bigger compound movements. Again, I use the barbell back squat as an example. We can kind of stick with that one. You could be maybe in the range of like 5 reps in reserve kind of area and still get some kind of anabolic response from that. And, but for like the smaller body parts, like your isolated type movements, you might need to get maybe a little closer to failure in order to do that. There's going to be some nuance to that, and there's going to be some individuality things based on that, or that are tied to that. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But I think that's the $1 million question. Like, well, exactly what should it be? Right. And there's no way to exactly measure that. There's a lot of studies that have tried to exactly measure that and then publish those. And then people try to exactly build their programs around that kind of stuff. But there's some considerations here.
Yeah, as far as the variables. So One of the variables would be, how long have you been training? What's your training age? How long away have you been, or how long has it been since you have recently been involved in a program?
Yeah.
So that's going to matter.